And then just going now to CSS. Norian, I like that you're already starting to play around with that. So we use CSS to make websites look good. Just going over what I mentioned last week, which was when you surround content within an HTML tag, you can then style it. And CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And cascading means when you write a style and you write other styles, and then at the very end you override the first one, the last one's the one that's going to take place. So that's the cascading effect of it. CSS tells the browser how we want the tags to look like. So here if I had like some div, like if I had a div that was 75% wide, 200 pixels tall, and I can say red, a background set as red, it would look something like that. And if I had a paragraph that I want the text to be purple, I could also state that with CSS. I always recommend to use style sheets. So in your project, we'll make a CSS folder and then create a file called styles.css. The file extension will be .css. And to add it to your HTML, you go to your index.html file, and inside the head section, you're going to write this piece of code which says it's a link tag, and you're going to connect it. You're going to state it's a style sheet, and then you're going to link it by that href attribute. You're going to say where it's at. So if we created a folder called CSS, and then the file name is style CSS, that's the same. That's how you would structure. That's how your file would have it. This is a syntax for CSS. So you have the very first part is your selector. That's like your target element that you're going to style. So in this example, it's an H1 tag. Then the next piece is the curly brace. That's the opening part of it where you define the properties to your style. The first one in this example is color. So I'm stating the color. And then you use a colon to define the value. In this case, in this example, it's the word blue, which can totally be, and normally is, a hex value. Do y'all know what a hex value is? You would put that there. And you would end that property or a declaration with a semicolon. That's how you would separate it out. Notice that there's a space in this example. There doesn't need to be a space. Also, just like the other examples that I've shown y'all, there could be a line break. So I can have color in one line and then font size right underneath that. Or no space, or sorry, no line break and no space. But remember, this is for you and your team, or future teams. That's when you look at your style CSS, you want to make it easy for you to make changes. So if you have everything combined or minified, it's gonna be a hard time figuring out how to make changes. And then the next one I have is font size. Notice there's a dash. So the way you state the styles is very case sensitive, and there is tons and tons and tons of sites, specifically like W3, that will list out all these styles. So there's a lot of resources for you to find out what styles you can override from the browser. Today you have way more options than you did back in the day. So it's really nice time to kind of play around with those kind of things. And then pixels, everybody knows pixels, right? Cool. And then once you end that, notice there's a semicolon to end that declaration, and then I end it with that curly brace. Any questions on that? No? Okay. So this is just another example. So if I had a paragraph, selector, and then I define styles for that tag. So for typography, you can have properties that override like the font, color, alignment. If you want text to be underlined, capitalized, indentation, letter spacing, shadows, there's so many more. So float is going to be one that you'll use a lot too. Float basically is to um, shift things over to a side or wrap things around things. So for example, if that top left box there was a div and I assigned a style to it that says float left, it's gonna shift that div to the left, and anything next to it will just wrap around it. So it's gonna come right after that. So in that example, I could have that float right. Yeah, float right could look, well, I guess that one's kind of different, but if that didn't have float right, it would just be right next to it. In that example there, it's just floating to the right. If my margin to the right there ends at that space. So again, it's just kind of like pulling things to one side or the other. Or have y'all seen like on Word where you have a picture and it says word wrap and then the text just wraps around it? If you do that in your site, you put a picture, you do style float left, that's exactly what the text would go, it would just go around it. The box model is very important. This basically applies to everything, so this is very important. All HTML elements can be considered as boxes. The term is used when talking about design and layout. And this is just kind of like an overview of what that is. So you're basically going to have your content. It could be anything. It could be a picture. It could be a word. It could be a whole layout. It could be anything. So when you have that content, you're always going to be able to modify the padding to it. So padding is that space around it. And then you're going to have a border and a margin. So margin clears the area outside of the border. So when you have that border, it's the area around that border. And also it's transparent. The border goes around the padding and the content, so it's like right outside of that. And then border, just like in any program like Photoshop or Word or PowerPoint, you can change the size, color, roundness, and all that with the border. And then padding is that area around the content. So it's right in between the border and that content. And padding is transparent as well. And of course, content is that centerpiece. And remember that it could be anything. So it could be, like for example, in here, if this was our div, we can say, I want there to be a 50 pixel space in between that. And it would push title down 50 pixels. So that's the box model. This is an example of a login form without any styles. I have a picture. I have two text fields. I have a text field, and I have another field that's a password, a button, a link, and then some copy. And with a little bit of CSS, you can make things look real nice. Still keep them simple. And then one of the latest applications that I've done, excuse me, this is where you would order some menu items. And you can see here, there's really not much you can see without any styles. But with some CSS, you get this. So I can have my header section, my navigation, my main content, and then some links or some footers. So again, like in this case, I kind of shifted around the header footer idea, but totally could have been any other concept too. So you can kind of get the idea of like the power, like how much power you can have with CSS and shifting layouts, using basic elements like patterns and colors, background images, that kind of thing. You can like change the whole site around with simple things.